I'll wait. Hello, everybody. Everything is through Zoom and through the world and everything else today, but happy to have all of you here and happy to have all of you joining us, whether you're here live through Facebook or through YouTube, or you watch this later. We'll be very happy to have you all here. So I want to say hello to everybody. Today's March 1st, 2022. My name's Hunter Ohanian, and we're all here at the Stonewall National Museum and Archive. And we're going to do a little tour and a talk about the work of Robert Giard. We're recording it and doing it through Zoom, since of course many people want to be able to see events that way. So of course, if you guys who are here have questions, please feel free to raise any questions. Can we turn the camera around just so that people can see who's here? Everybody can wave. No, just turn the camera around so I can see the fellow. And everybody just say gay. Say gay. And of course, that's one of the things that we're talking about a lot right now here in South Florida. And I'm wearing a say gay button. And if anybody would like to get them, I just had a request from 100 people at a rally in Orlando. Young people who had a rally or having a rally this weekend to fight the effort by the Florida legislature and the governor to prohibit sexual orientation and gender identity from being included in classrooms. And so it's astonishing that this is happening today. It's astonishing that children are again being used as weapons and as tools by conservative individuals who actually oppose the LGBTQ community. And just a little bit of history on this. Back in 1959, there was something that the state legislature did known as the Johns Committee. And some of you may be familiar with it, but there was a state legislative committee report whose purpose was to root homosexuals out of all of the Florida state colleges. And the idea of it being was that all male homosexuals were going to elicit young men to join the homosexual leagues. The report was published in 1964. The state of Florida spent over $500,000 on this report. Look up the Johns Committee. We have all of the original papers here, but it was routinely rejected by the people in the state of Florida at the time. And so that came out in 1964. But I will tell you, I bring educators into our archive, and you mentioned the Johns Committee to them, and it still brings terror through their hearts because they were afraid they were going to lose their jobs to teaching in the public schools. And of course, remember, this happened in 1959. This is 4 years after McCarthyism, after Eisenhower put the ban in place for any gay person to serve in the military or to serve in the civil service. And for many of us, it was the context that those of us who were members of the LGBTQ community grew up in. But that was the first time that Florida did it. The second time was around a woman by the name of Anita Bryant. And again, it was about children. The Miami-Dade County Commission voted themselves to outlaw discrimination against people based upon sexual orientation. Anita Bryant and her supporters created an organization called Save Our Children. And they brought it to the voters in Miami-Dade, and they got the voters to overturn those 9 members of the Miami-Dade County Commission. Now, what Anita didn't know was she was probably the best thing for gay rights in this good country. Because someday I'll get to the point of doing an exhibition. But by that time, there were 100 or 150 gay newspapers, large and small, throughout the United States. She was on the cover of every one of those newspapers. She coalesced with people in a way that you couldn't plan. Well, maybe today, as we're seeing in Ukraine, we're seeing people coming together and people to fight what's going on there. People came together around her, around the opposition to her. Now, it took 18 years for Miami-Dade to overturn that. Broward County has done it well. But again, it's the second example in which children are being used to propel a conservative agenda. Now we have it in 2022. We saw it with QAnon last year. Who's that woman who's a member of Congress from Georgia? Marjorie Taylor Greene. She is saying to people it's about saving children out there. And this bill, where they're trying to take the word gay out of schools, or to take one's gender identity, we have fought so hard for all of these rights and acceptance. And younger people have so many more options to them today than we did. And they want to take those options away. So that's why we are saying gay as much as we possibly can. We're very fortunate that this year we're doing a seminar here in Fort Lauderdale about LGBTQ curriculum. It will be, right now, I think there are about 40-something people signed up. It'll be about 125 people there about developing LGBTQ curriculum throughout the United States. I'm happy that we'll be doing that there as well. I want to do another plug as well, too, to a project. Come on in, hello, to a project, that's fine, that was funded by the Florida Humanities Council, and thank you to them and the research that they do. And just so that people have it, you can find it on the website. It's called, the website is stonewallnma.org. It is the largest web-based compilation of LGBTQ history, and it's organized under milestones, art, literature, music, sports, business, all of those places that you would want to be able to bring it into the classrooms. And so it's important for us to be able to do that. Just a little bit about Stonewall, of course. We are the largest LGBTQ library, supposedly in the United States and the world, and so that makes it the largest one in the solar system, I guess we can say. I won't go out the whole Milky Way, but if we can just turn the camera around for a minute, you're looking at 28,000 volumes of LGBTQ history, and I had a great meeting with our volunteer who oversees the library this week, and guess what? We are out of space. We do not have any more shelf space. If you guys who are here, look, you can see we're actually putting books on the top of bookcases because we are about 98% capacity. If you look over here, you can see 3, 6, 9, 10, 11, about 15 boxes filled with duplicate books to be able to go out. But these are books, they come in all the time, and these are the duplicates that we give to the people. And so if you know anybody who is interested in books, of donating them to us, please bring them here, and then we send them out to libraries, LGBTQ centers. We got some requests recently again from Florida about classroom teachers who develop their own classroom libraries. And I never really thought about the fact that there are classroom libraries as well too, in addition to the library in the school. And in the classroom libraries, they're now looking to put LGBTQ books in those libraries as well too. And so very important for us to be able to figure out how we can share all of this information. In addition to the library, of course, we have an archive, which has 2,700 linear feet, about 6 million pages, goes back to about 1950 to the present day. For those of you who are here in person, I'll be happy to give you a tour of the archive afterwards because it's a wonderful thing to be able to see. Some of you have donated materials to it, and so thank you. We have a number of our volunteers who are here. We probably have a coterie of about 15 wonderful individuals who come in at different points during the week and work on the different projects, and they really provide the backbone of everything that has to happen that allows us to be able to keep all of the stuff in great order. And then lastly, I want to say we do a lot of public programming now because of COVID. We do almost all virtually, although it's nice to have people come here in person. But tomorrow night, Alan Ellensweg will be here talking about his new biography of George Platt Lyons. So Oxford University Press just came out with this book. This talk will be at 6:30 tomorrow night. If you're not able to make it, you can certainly find it on our website. It'll be a 60-minute talk with him. For those of you who knows George Platt Lyons' work, major but black and white photographer from the 20th century. He worked for a number of the ballet companies. Once you see the images, you will definitely be familiar with the work. And then he had this whole body of work that was his personal work, which was the homoerotic work. And so Alan has done an amazing job. This is the first substantial. There's some wonderful compilations of George Platt Lyons' work, but this is the first time that there's a great biography about the artist himself. So I want the people to come to that. Before we end on the talk, I also want to show people a little bit about the exhibition in the other room, which is called Misinformation, which is looking at the similarities between the early days of the HIV and AIDS epidemic and COVID, and how all of the same misinformation was being spread as well. So we'll get to that as well. But let's talk about Robert Giard. Robert is the one who's actually brought us all here together today. He is an American artist by every standard. And Paula, I'm going to move back over here so people can look at the work, but maybe you can move the camera over there so that people can still hear me. And so Robert was born in 1939. He died of an apparent heart attack in 2002 while on a train. It was an unusual thing. He was in his early 60s. He was his longtime partner, who is the one who's made these images available to us, Jonathan Sillen. The two of them had been together. They lived in Amagansett on Long Island. He never learned to drive a car, but he spent much of his time in New York. And he created over 800 portraits. Now, what you're looking at here are just 10 of the portraits. These are original silver gelatin pieces. And Bob studied literature as an undergraduate student. And as we say in the wall text here, Robert says, when I was 10 years old, I looked up the word homosexual in the family dictionary. Symbolic act. I've been a gay reader ever since. And of course, that's how he opens the particular book that we have here, which is called Particular Voices. And everybody should stop and take a look at that. So when he was in his 40s, he started making these portraits. And I'll read a little bit about what was behind making individual portraits. But what we have here is a collection of them, and I will go through almost all of them are artists, but he did so many leading figures in the LGBT community that I couldn't resist putting them in. Sylvia Rivera is down over here. Of course, she's the second from the end. I think the camera is in front of that right now. And Afro Homo, who were theater majors and performers, are right here at the center. But everybody else in this selection are writers. But let me read a little bit to you. And this is Robert's own voice about the work and why he made it. He wrote this in 1997. Every June, my lover Jonathan and I would participate in New York City's Lesbian and Gay Pride March. The response was characteristically one of heady immersion and the communal experience of celebrating the Stonewall Rebellion of 1969. That particular June in 1985, a friend suggested that after the march, we go to the public theater to see the evening performance of Larry Kramer's The Normal Heart. As I sat watching the play unfold in the darkened space of the arena-style theater, its walls inscribed with the names of the dead, some of which I recognized, I was moved to a sense of urgency. The general euphoria of the march earlier in the day was coming up against the dramatization of present suffering and loss, and a renewed consciousness of the historical indignities which gay people have encountered, as well as a further reminder that my own days could prove briefer than most of us are accustomed to anticipating. By the end of that evening, I had arrived at the decision about my work that it should be of use to other gay people by recording something of note about our experience, our history, and our culture. A few weeks later in July, my friend Bill took me for my birthday to a performance of William Hoffman's play, As Is. This occasion confirmed my intention to attach whatever skill or insight I might possess to an overtly gay and lesbian theme. There had always been a pronounced gay element in my photography work. Many of my portraits were of gay people. Some of the nudes of men, usually gay men, could be described as homoerotic. Nevertheless, these gay or homoerotic elements were not the same as a sustained body of work that chronicled a significant aspect of gay life. Here were the pieces. I was gay, I was a portrait photographer, and the books had helped, and books had helped me. My own undergraduate degree was in English and American literature, and I held an MA in comparative literature. When I first undertook this work, I did not realize just how extensive of a task lay ahead of me, nor did a lot of other people, gay or straight. When I informed them that I had so far photographed 30 writers for the series, they regarded me with surprise and queried, "You mean there are more?" I was learning myself that there were quite a few more. 6 months from its inception, I found that I was committing every available moment to this work project. I began with men because I was familiar with their books and their experience and had some initial context. Within a year, having read more lesbian writing, I started to photograph women. Since I had been a reader, there was a nucleus of authors whose work I already knew. I wrote to them. That same good friend Bill who took me to As Is, was a member of the Men of All Colors Together in New York City. He put in a word for me with the poet and playwright Asato Saint, who in turn referred me to Samuel Delaney, Sapphire, and members of other countries. This pattern would repeat itself as one writer would lead me to others, and I accumulated numerous scraps of paper bearing names, addresses, phone numbers, and book titles. Thus began the process of haunting the bookstores, reading the work of the author, communicating first by letter, eventually following this up with a phone call, setting a date, and finally traveling to the writer to make the portrait. My work first began close to home in New York City and gradually branched out from there. Assembling the archive entailed a literary journey. The place name which accompanies each portrait indicates where the portrait was made. In most, though not all cases, I traveled to the writer's home base. I grew interested in the gay and lesbian culture in that particular city or region, and in the writers who spoke from that place, regardless of where their work was widely known elsewhere. Whenever I wasn't teaching and could come up with the money, I sometimes, even when I couldn't, I traveled to photograph for the series. Often I felt like Mercury, bearing greetings, gossip, and opinions across time and space from one member of the writers' community to another. So it's the context in which we actually see his work. We see that somebody who was in his 40s develops through his own talent and his own knowledge a way of creating a body of work of something which when he began, he didn't really know existed. And what he's now done is he's left us with this legacy of these amazing portraits. And so let's take a look at a few of them. Over here, we have Leslie Feinberg and her partner, Minnie Bruce Platt. We just did a talk with Minnie Bruce. She is living, I think, in North Carolina or South Carolina, a wonderful poet. Leslie Feinberg transitioned a number of years ago, and their book was called Butch Dyke, I believe is the name of the book. And Leslie passed away, I would say probably 7 or 8 years ago. Here we have Dorothy Allison. And again, this is relatively typical of some of Robert's work and why he liked to work in the style. You see Dorothy Allison with her partner, their child, and their dog. It's not a writer sitting at their desk. They're wanting to be able to show that these are human beings, or he was wanting to show that these are human beings outside of where they normally were photographed or seen. Adrienne Rich, of course, many people are familiar with her work. She was a major figure in the 20th century. We have many of her books here in the library. Joan Nessel is very much alive today in her 80s and very much involved in the Lesbian History Archives, as well as in a number of other books as well, a true leader in the field. I actually saw Afro Pomo Homo in Boston. I think I saw them like on the theater on Clarendon Street. I'm looking at my friend here, Stephen Nonak, to see if he remembers seeing them. But it was a gay theatrical group, and I forget which of them is actually teaching today at Bradford College. And so a beautiful portrait of the three of them. And here, of course, you just see this list of some of the individuals who are in the book and he took portraits of. Justin Chin, there's a piece of his writing and poetry here in the case. Fortunately, he passed away, but probably about 4 or 5 years ago. Sarah Schulman, a very young picture of Sarah Schulman. And maybe, Paula, behind you, you can grab Sarah's book there. The title being Let the Record Show, of course, which is, for those of you who have not seen this book, is it's the history of ACT UP and AIDS in New York. We did a talk with Sarah probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago. You can see that talk on the website. Here, Sarah is quite young. This portrait was done in 1988. And in our upcoming issue of Archeon, we have an interview with Sarah to talk to you about sitting for Bob and for the portrait here. But please, if you have not seen that book about the Let the Record Show, that the talk is really a great way of being able to see that. Jackie Woodson is a wonderful writer, does a lot of youth-based work. We have a number of her books here, and she just won the MacArthur Award. And here we have Sylvia Rivera, who, as many of you know, Sylvia Rivera was at the Stonewall Uprising. Of course, you recognize her and her friend Marsha P. Johnson, both names, of course, are very well known. We couldn't do something like this without putting her in. Of course, here she is at home. And finally, we have Ledford Wilson, which many of you know for his plays, in particular, the 5th of July, as well as others that he's done. So it gives you a sense of the magnitude. Of course, there are many other wonderful portraits. And I just want to give a shout out to the book itself called Particular Voices. Let me show it for the audience here. And there are beautiful portraits in here as well. And this book actually came out in 1997, I want to say. So you can actually find a used copy of this out there as well. And finally, on this part, I want to leave you with, many of you are familiar with photography maven and disco maven Vince Aletti. Vince, of course, is alive and well. He wrote for the Village Voice for many years about disco. He probably is responsible for disco music being what the genre that it is today, because he gave it so much respectability. But he's also been an editor at the New Yorker for many years in photography. And here's what Vince said about Robert Giard. And there is a wonderful, maybe we can share this with Paula. I'll get you the portrait that Robert Giard did of Vince Aletti. Giard, whose undergraduate and graduate degrees were in English, American comparative literature, was prepared, dedicated, and tenacious. According to his survivor, Jonathan Sillen, he never went to photograph someone without reading their work. Giard lived near East Hampton. He never learned to drive a car, so cross-country trips involved a patchwork of planes, trains, and bus travel on time carved out from his regular teaching jobs. Often I felt like Mercury, he wrote, bearing greetings, gossip, and opinions across time. If he had to, Giard would photograph a writer in a hotel room on a book tour, but his best portraits were environmental, made where his subjects were at home, just as we saw with the Dorothy Allison one here. And he could locate them in spaces that revealed as much about them as their prose or poems. As we said before, you see in Dorothy Allison's portrait here, beaming in the dappled sunlight of her California backyard with her crouching partner, framed by rough fence posts, hanging plants in an overturned wheelbarrow. Their son straddles Dorothy Allison's shoulders. A big dog nuzzles into the group, and there's not a typewriter in sight. And of course, it's a wonderful way to think about those of us who, we look at political figures, we look at artists, we look at literary figures, and of course, being able to imagine them having fun and in their own spaces is really very important. One thing that I have not seen, and it would be good to look at, is to look at what he describes as some of his homoerotic work and to understand how that informed his work as an artist as well, too. It would also be interesting to know, if he started this work in 1985, who were some of the other photographers that he would be looking at. So, for example, was he looking at George Platt lines at that particular time? Was he looking at Peter Giard at that particular time? Who were the other influences that he was looking at that was bringing this body of work? There is certainly, I would say, from an aesthetic standpoint, you can look at some of Giard's, Peter Giard's portraits from this period, and there is a similar sense when you look at those subjects and look at some of these as well, too. Documenting artists and writers, of course, is something that culture has looked at for a long period of time, and something that we should continue to do. The importance, again, for this series of photographs is that, again, as we sit in this room with 28,000 volumes, and he was surprised when he started this project to be able to find 30 writers. It's an amazing how time has come and how in most of our lives, we've witnessed what this is actually about. Questions, comments before we move into the other room?
Hunter, were these photographs, did they all belong to his partner? And if so, are they destined for some organization, nonprofit? Do you know that?
Yes.
And were they printed for the purposes of exhibition? Not necessarily this exhibition, but a previous one.
So of the 10 portraits that are here, this one of Sarah Schulman is the only contemporary image. All of these other prints were made during his lifetime. So these are visual, or these are vintage prints. Right now, the New York Public Library has a complete collection. And I'm happy to say the Leslie Loman Museum of Gay and Lesbian Art has a complete collection as well. These are all on loan from Jonathan Sillen, who is his surviving partner. So, and I believe there is a way commercially to be able to, of course, we're a museum, so we don't get involved in sales, but I do believe that if one looks around, you can see that these prints are actually even purchasable for other versions of them.
Thank you.
Yeah. Questions, comments? Yes.
If you were to add one from one email reflection, what would you add?
That's a great question. So, does anybody know the work of Paul Minnette, a wonderful writer? He graduated from Yale. Swimming Pool Library. No, is that Paul?
No.
Can you just give us some titles of Paul's work?
Was it Borrowed Time?
Borrowed Time. Yep. We'll look it up fast. This is a literature quote. There is a beautiful portrait of Paul Minnette, which I think is really amazing. But I hope you spend some time looking through some of these, because I think it depends upon all of our aesthetics and how we relate. There's a very young Andrew Halloran in this, which is just beautiful, and that's actually what's really nice about it, because some of these folks, Halloran is still alive today. Paul Minnette is not. But some of these people were captured very early on in their careers, and that's very important for us to have as well, too.
The ones that pop up are Borrowed Time, Afterlife, and those that are most prominent, Last Watch of the Night. Okay.
Other titles by Paul Minnette. Great. Well, who wants to go see the next exhibition and take a quick little tour of the archive?